Calling our 1 p.m. agenda to order of the House Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee meeting. Welcome, everyone. We're meeting a little bit earlier than usual, but since we're in recess, didn't want to keep everybody waiting. Wanted everyone to be able to get an early start on the weekend. If this is your first time joining us in the House Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee, very grateful to have you here. I'll just go over a few housekeeping rules to ensure smooth proceedings for this afternoon. One, if you can make sure that your name as listed in the Zoom profile reflects the name that you submitted testimony under. That'll help us spotlight you and would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you can keep yourself muted until called upon, that will also be helpful to ensuring that our members can hear the testimony. We do have a 2-minute time limit here in CPC. There's some grace, so at 2 minutes, I'll ask you to start to kindly summarize. That'll help us stay on time and ensure that we're able to continue moving a lot of these very important measures. And lastly, I just ask that everyone continue, as you've been doing a great job of, extending courtesy and aloha to each other, no matter what our perspectives may be. I think that makes us a very special state, particularly in these difficult political times in our nation's history. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. First off, we have HB 1597 relating to electrical contractors, and this extends for a period of 10 years the sunset date of Enact 65, which provided a limited exemption to the licensing requirements for certain individuals in situations when an electric utility must retain qualified individuals to work with high voltage who are not licensed in the state but are otherwise deemed qualified by the electric utility. On HB 1596, we have the Board of Electricians and Plumbers. Philip Lucero, in opposition?
Yes, in opposition. Good morning.
Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Okay, yeah, the board, the E&P board is opposed of the bill. It is too board because high voltage currently is being done by EJ license in Hawaii. For example, all of the solar farms, except for the latest one, which is strictly owned by Hawaiian Electric, was done with high voltage work and also substations. And all of this work is under the code book, which is part of an EJ's license requirements. And also when an EJ does apply to get a license with the E&P board, the test is based strictly on the code book, which covers high voltage, anything over 1,000 volts in Article 450 and 490 of the code book. And they can be questioned on these high voltage articles. And so for the E&P board, the bill is too broad when they say high voltage lines and groundwork, because currently the contractors in the state of Hawaii is doing that work and qualified to do that work. Like I said, for example, was all of the solar farms that was built. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucero. We also have Michael Swanson from Hawaiian Electric in support.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair Kitagawa, and members of the committee. Again, my name is Mike Swanson. I'm the Transmission and Distribution Director for Hawaiian Electric. Hawaiian Electric is in support of House Bill 1597. As you may be aware, House Bill 1597 and Senate Bill 2644 will provide a 10-year extension for the two utilities, Hawaiian Electric and Kauai Island Electric Cooperative, to hire contractors that are licensed in Hawaii to utilize qualified high voltage workers that do not have an EJ electrician's license. Without this limited exemption, efforts to ensure a resilient, reliable, and affordable electric grid could be compromised. Major storms, hurricanes, grid modernization, specialized work that requires specialized training, and our decarbonization efforts and simply having a safe, reliable, and affordable electric grid is not only good for Hawaiian Electric, but it's also good for every business and resident of the state of Hawaii. As an electric utility, we must have access to resources that, quite frankly, are not available in Hawaii. We must have access to out-of-state journeyman line workers, cable splicers, and substation electricians. Just because one may have an EJ electrician's license does not make them qualified to perform high voltage work at a utility. It is specialized training that's required to work in high voltage environments. Climbing poles with energized conductors, rubber gloving voltages up to 21,000 volts, hot sticking, which is also known as live line work methods, up to 138,000 volts, splicing lead and poly cable and confined space manhole with up to 5 energized in circuits, working on specialized substation equipment with energized equipment right next to the worker, being transported 150 foot below a helicopter, which is known as long lining, and being dropped off on a transmission tower with energized 138,000 volts. These are just some examples of what we expect from our contractors in respect to training and experience. And with no disrespect to the electricians with an EJ license, but I'm sorry, simply requiring a licensed contractor in the state of Hawaii to ensure their employees have a state of Hawaii EJ electrician's license is not sufficient to work at a utility. Hawaiian Electric strives to perform much of the work ourselves, but must rely on licensed electrical contractors to have the expertise and appropriately trained high voltage personnel to assist in constructing, repairing, and maintaining the company's high voltage system. This highly trained, highly skilled resource is already working for one of the 2 utilities in the state. These resources needed to supplement our workforce simply do not exist in Hawaii. There is no bench. The reason for this lack of bench is simple. High voltage linemen, cable splicers, and substation
Mike,
electricians.
if you can start to summarize, please.
Yep, almost. Who work for a utility contractor frequently leave Hawaii to find other work. They just simply sign up at in another state at a local IBW, and there's work available throughout the nation. So Hawaii Electric also understands some stakeholders, some of the concerns of the stakeholders, and would like to continue working with them to address some of their concerns. In an attempt to ensure exemptions narrow applicability, we would request the committee considering the following provision be added to the bill. And that is, provided in this exemption is limited to the use by a public utility for high voltage electrical workers that perform electric transmission and distribution line construction, maintenance, and substation work. With this provision, we ask the committee to pass House Bill 1597. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this matter.
Thank you very much, Mike. Members, please note we also have testimony in opposition and support from various entities and unions. That's the extent of testifiers indicating that they would be virtually present to testify on HB 1597. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on this measure? Okay, seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions on HB 1597? Representative Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hiko. Good afternoon, Mike. Mr. Swanson, how are you? Thank you for being here. I'm just intrigued because I remember when we passed Act 65 back in 2013, and at that time there was in fact an insufficient number of high voltage power line projects and workers at the time, and that was the reason for Act 65 being passed. But given that it's nearly 9 years later, the electrical contractors are now arguing that the number has changed given the types of projects we have, given the current number of high voltage projects being performed in the state, including photovoltaic, solar, wind farms, etc., as well as the ongoing availability of training programs. So the board, in fact, believes there is sufficient high voltage power line work available to train licensed journey worker electricians. So is this in contrast to what HECO is finding?
Yes, it is. And I can give you a quick example. One of our line construction contractors reached out to me the other day and basically said, hey, there are no linemen on the books at either of the IBW locals, 1245 and 1186. There's no linemen available. If we were to come do that, we're going to need to bring resources from the mainland. So that is just one validation point for me that those workers don't exist. A second one is I've had job postings on the Hawaiian Electric website for many months now requesting journeyman linemen apply for positions. There have been no applicants that live in the state of Hawaii that are qualified.
Okay.
The only applicants we're getting that are qualified are from the mainland.
Okay. One of the contentions, and unfortunately they aren't here to testify, but looking at some of the other written testimony from those in opposition, is that the definition is too broad. And specifically, it talks about, in the bill, it currently talks about the utility company being able to construct, repair, and maintain new systems built to meet Hawaii's renewable energy goals. So let's bifurcate, let's separate the issue of the actual high voltage work in and of itself versus the repair, maintenance. Is that all is it all in one, or can it be separated? And again, I tried to write down your amendment. I'm sorry, it wasn't in your written testimony. So I was just trying furiously to write down your amendment. And it sounds like you were sort of on the same page with IBEW, but I'm just trying to understand that. So maybe there was some consensus with them?
Yes, that's correct. We've been working with the IBW for a while now, 1260. And then some folks from Hawaiian Electric have been working with 1186 as well. But that's basically what it's saying. We want to limit the exemption to just the electric utilities and to just those workers that are doing the high voltage work on electric transmission and distribution lines and within our substations.
Okay, so you wouldn't be opposed then to taking out the language that deals with the repair, construction, and maintenance of the new systems?
Well, the repair and the maintenance of those of our lines, of our power lines, and of our substations, we want to keep in there. That's what we need to keep. The remaining pieces are what can be exempt from our perspective.
So what are the remaining pieces? I'm sorry, I just need clarification. I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so like any other electrician type work that doesn't involve our lines, I think we'd have to get clarity from maybe Mr. Lucero or others, but the construction of power lines themselves, both overhead and underground, and the work with inside our substations, that is the critical work for us where the resources just are not available.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Swanson. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Carr. Members, any additional questions on HB 1597? Okay, seeing no further questions, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 2248, relating to schools. This amends the definition of private schools under the compulsory attendance law to require unlicensed but accredited private schools to annually submit health and safety documentation to the Hawaii Council of Private Schools or the Hawaii Catholic Schools Office. On HB 2248, we have our sole testifier, the Hawaii Association of Independent Schools, in support, Phil Bossert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Johansson, Vice Chair Kitagawa, and members of the committee. I'll just stand on our testimony in the interest of time and be happy to answer any questions if you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. Members, again, that's the extent of testimony on this measure. Anyone else wishing to testify in HB 2248? Okay, seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions? Seeing no questions, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 2434. This is relating to water carriers. And this requires each water carrier to file a strategic plan with the Public Utilities Commission every 5 years. On HB 2434, we have the Department of Agriculture in support.
Aloha Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Phyllis Shimabukuro Geyser, Chairperson, Hawaii Department of Agriculture. We stand on our written testimony supporting the intent of the measure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. We also have the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission in support.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. David Parsons on behalf of the PUC will stand on our written testimony and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We also have Michael Munekata with Ulupono Initiative in support. Micah, we see your profile. There we go.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair Kitagawa. Ulupono will stand on its testimony and support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Micah. Members, please note that we also have comments from Young Brothers, but they have not indicated that they would be present to testify. Is there anyone else wishing to testify in HB 2434? Seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions? Okay, seeing no questions, then we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 1894, relating to human remains. This accommodates the use of both traditional and native Hawaiian burial practices and environmentally friendly burial practices by including water cremation in the treatment and disposal of human remains. On HB 1894, we have Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Director Awakuni offering comments.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Kat Awakuni Colon on behalf of DCCA. DCCA will stand on our comments, appreciating especially the HD2 amendments. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. We also have the Department of Health offering comments.
Good afternoon, Chair Johansson and Vice Chair Kitagawa, and members of the committee. My name is Lauren Kim, Policy Officer for the Department of Health. We will stand on our testimony offering comments and amendments that we believe establish a regulatory environment that conforms with what existing funeral homes and mortuaries have to comply with. And I'll be standing by for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauren. We also have Dean Fisher with Fisher and Associates in support.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the CPC committee. Dean Fisher here with Fisher and Associates. I submitted my written testimony yesterday before the Department of Health had submitted theirs. And after reading their testimony, I stand in strong support of their changes on HB 1894. Our testimonies both addressed the licensing portion. I was thinking a simple certification might be the route to go that some states do require, but I feel what the Department of Health and how they have stated is much stronger language, and to hold water and flame cremation to the existing standards would be the right way to go. Other than that, I totally feel that this bill is a game changer, not only for funeral service, but for the environment, for the citizens of Hawaii, and I ask for your support. Thanks, and I'll be around to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dean. We also have Kabehi Correa with Aloha Mortuary in support.
Aloha Chair, Vice Chair, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I concur with the Department of Health's comments and statements for the regulations. I do strongly believe that in my written testimony, I shared with you the benefits that it would have for families here in Hawaii. Other than that, I will be available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Kabehi. We also have Pono Ledford in support.
Aloha, I'm Pono Ledford. I'm a physician in Hilo. I stand by my written testimony in strong support. I'll be around for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ledford. We also have Mililani Trask in support, who is not here, but offered support. Members, please note that we have numerous other testimonies in support from individuals as well as comments on HB 1894. Is there anyone else wishing to testify in HB 1894? Okay, seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions? Okay, seeing no questions then on HB 1894, we'll move on to HB 1478. Relating to public safety, this requires property owners of residential real property to disclose as a part of the mandatory seller disclosures in real estate transactions whether the installed smoke alarm is in accordance with existing building or residential codes based on information provided by the State Fire Council. And it requires the State Fire Council to create and maintain an informational guide on approved smoke alarms that are in accordance with existing building or residential codes and post the guide on specified websites. On HB 1478, we have the Hawaii State Fire Council, Gary Lum, in support.
Good afternoon, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair Kitagawa, members of the committee. Gary Lum, representing the State Fire Council. We'll stand on our written testimony submitted in support and be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Members, that's the extent of individuals indicating that they would be virtually present to testify in HB 1478. Please note that we have testimony also proffered in support, in opposition, and with comments on HB 1478 in addition to the State Fire Councils that we've heard. Is there anyone else wishing to testify in HB 1478? Okay, seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions? Seeing no questions, then we'll move on to our next agenda item. This is HB 2239 relating to condominiums. It increases the minimum number of residential units in a condominium project that must be offered for sale to prospective owner occupants in the 30-day period following the initial date of the sale of the condo from 50% to 90%. On HB 2293, do we have Jennifer Kemp with NIAP in opposition? No, we do not. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on HB 2239? I'm sorry if I've transposed the numbers to anyone during this time. It's HB 2239. Anyone else wishing to testify on this measure?
Hello, Chair. Evan Oy on behalf of NIAP. Sorry, we submitted testimony with Jennifer's name on it, but on behalf of
Go
NIAP.
ahead, Evan.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. Evan Oy on behalf of NIAP Hawaii in opposition to this bill. Our primary concern is with the increased percentage is the negative impact that it will have on sales for new projects. Potential buyers often have a tough time committing to an owner occupancy residence for a period of 2 to 3+ years due to their changing circumstances. The current 50% owner occupant requirement in HRS section 514B 95.54 has proven to be aligned with the historical residential demand. Rarely does the immediate demand exceed the current 50% offering based on the composition of the market and legal obligation for purchasers to occupy the unit after closing. Typically, there is not enough owner occupancy demand to justify 90% requirement in all condominium projects. Although the delay is only 30 days, the early stages of our product launch are critical to sales momentum. If sales occur during this period, it could result in further delays or even cancellation of a project, resulting in lower housing stock of new homes. For these reasons, we urge you to defer HB 2239. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We'll be available for any questions.
Thank you, Evan, and sorry about that.
No
Is there anyone else wishing to testify in HB 2239? Okay, seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions? Okay, seeing no questions, and we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 2280. This is relating to real property, and it specifies that planned community associations cannot prohibit or unreasonably restrict the use of a unit owner's enclosed yard area for personal agriculture. On HB 2280, we have no one indicating they'd be present to testify, but members, please note that there's testimony in opposition and support in written form on HB 2280. Since there are no testifiers present to ask questions with, we'll dispense with asking of questions. Or I'm sorry, I forgot to double check. Is there anyone else wishing to testify in HB 2280 who might be with us? Okay, seeing no testifiers, then we will dispense with the question and answer portion for HB 2280, and we'll move on to our next agenda item, HB 1436, relating to development rights. And this expands the authority of counties to transfer development rights to address areas at risk of sea level rise, coastal erosion, storm surge, or flooding. On HB 1436, do we have the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development, Ruby Edwards, present?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. This is Ruby Edwards. I'm testifying on behalf of the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. We stand on a written testimony in support with some suggested amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruby. Members, please note that's the extent of individuals indicating that they would be present virtually to testify. We do have additional testimony provided by governmental agencies in support, as well as an individual in opposition on 1436. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on HB 1436? Okay, seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions? Okay, seeing no questions, then we'll move on to our last agenda item, HB 2147, relating to municipal solid waste landfill permits. This would reinstate the Department of Health's authority to permit federal municipal solid waste landfills. On HB 2147, we have the Department of Health in support.
Good afternoon, Chair Johansson, Vice Chair Kitagawa, and House and committee members. Glenn I with the Solid and Hazardous Waste Branch on behalf of the Department of Health. The department stands on its written testimony in support and are available for any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, please note that we also have an additional testimony in support from a governmental agency on HB 2147. Is there anyone else wishing to testify in HB 2147? Okay, seeing no further testifiers, members, any questions? Okay, seeing no questions, then we'll recess for decision making. Recess. Thank you, everyone. Reconvening our 1 p.m. agenda of the Consumer Protection and Commerce Committee. First off, on HB 1597 relating to electrical contractors, I think the testimony was very helpful in that it engendered a lot of fruitful discussion. Clearly, there's disagreement about whether or not this is needed. And I think that's a helpful disagreement to flesh out. I do share the Board of Electrician and Plumbers, as well as the Contractors Licensing Board concern that it is overly broad. And I do, I do take HECO at its word that it really just is looking for a narrow exemption, but may not necessarily have the level of workforce that it needs in high voltage transmission lines. So as a result, what I would like to do is adopt HECO's amendment, and because it was only read, I'm going to reread it in its entirety for the members. Adding in the bill this additional clause that provided this exemption is limited to use by a public utility for high voltage electrical workers that perform electric transmission and distribution line construction, maintenance, and substation work. I think that significantly narrows the scope of the exemption, as well as ensuring that some of the legitimate concerns as teased out by some of the labor organizations about potential mission creep by HECO can be ameliorated. So I'd like to take HECO's proffered amendment to again reduce the scope of the exemption. I would also like to decrease the number of years that this exemption exists from 10 in the bill to 5 to continue to keep up this discussion and whether or not this exemption is necessary. So not giving it an overly long lifespan, so 5 years. And then inserting a defective date of January 1, 2050 to make sure that we have to continue to discuss this bill in the event that perhaps this exemption is not necessary. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing no comments or questions, then Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1597 with amendments. Chair and Vice Chair vote aye. Representative Aquino.
Aye.
Representative Har.
Aye.
Representative Hashem.
Aye.
Representative Kong is excused. Representative Mizuno.
Aye.
Representative Morikawa. Aye. Representative Onishi.
Aye.
Representative Tarnas is excused. Representative Matsumoto.
Aye.
Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Next on HB 2248 relating to schools. The recommendation here is to pass this measure unamended and as is. Any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, then Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 2248 HD1 as is, noting the absences of Representatives Kong and Tarnas, who will be noted absent for the rest of today's agenda. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Next on HB 2434 relating to water carriers, the recommendation here is to pass this measure as is. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 2434 HD1 as is. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Next on HB 1894 relating to human remains. I think we had some great discussion on this bill last year, and many in the committee had concerns about the regulatory authority and making sure that the oversight was there to protect public health, and I shared those concerns. I do very much appreciate the Department of Health's suggested amendment because I want to ensure that across the funeral services and disposition of remains industry, that there is parity and oversight and regulation, again, to ensure that the quality of public health and safety and sanitation exists across every type of means of disposition. So the recommendation here is going to be to pass HB 1894 with amendments, including the Department of Health suggested amendments, again, to ensure that they have regulation and oversight authority of water cremation. if it were to be enacted and created. I also appreciate their amendments that further tighten up that, post the actual process of cremation, that the county would have oversight over the effluent discharge into the municipal water systems. And because there are regulations on that end as well, that would be sort of the appropriate regulatory authority. So both pre and post the actual process of cremation, I feel like these amendments help to address oversight and regulatory concerns. I'd also like to amend the bill. I think when it originally started out, it used to be licensure by DCCA, which is why it refers to Title 25, but it should probably be under Title 19, which is a more appropriate health title. It's already got a defective date. Just see. I think those are the extent of the recommendations to amend HB 1894. I have received the prior concurrence of the Health and Human Services and Homelessness Chair, as well as the Judiciary and Hawaiian Affairs Chair, to make these changes to ensure tighter oversight from a consumer protection standpoint. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none then, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1894 HD2 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, members, on HB 1478 relating to public safety. The recommendation here is going to be just to make technical and non-substantive amendments. Any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1478 HD1 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, members, on HB 2239 relating to condominiums. The recommendation here is to pass this measure as is. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none then, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 2239 HD1 as is. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, on HB 2280 relating to real property. The recommendation here is to pass with some simple technical and non-substantive amendments. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 2280 HD1 with amendments. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. Next, on HB 1436 relating to development rights, the recommendation is to pass this measure as is. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none then, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 1436 HD1 as is. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. And lastly, members, HB 2147 relating to municipal solid waste landfill permits. The recommendation is to also pass this measure as is. Members, any comments or questions on the recommendation? Okay, seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote, please.
The recommendation of the chair is to pass HB 2147 HD1 as is. Are there any reservations? Any noes? Chair, your recommendation is adopted.
Okay, with that, that concludes today's agenda. Members, we do have permission next week to go a little bit earlier so as not to keep people so late. We'll probably also commence with a Tuesday hearing at 1 p.m. as well, just to try to get out a little bit faster. And we do have authority to begin before our usual 2 p.m. start time. That has yet to be noticed, but it will be shortly. So with that, my thanks to the members and thanks to everyone for participating in today's hearing. We are adjourned.